Hi everyone, this is Matthew Janda for Card Runners, and I'm here with my fourth FLOPZILLA video where we're going to be analyzing how to play 3-bet pots in position. So here's some generic video information about the different types of videos I tend to make. So if you are unfamiliar with the different types of videos I do make at Card Runners, you probably want to freeze this slide right here and read through it so you can make sure that the type of video you're watching will have the type of content you're looking for. And lastly, here's the list of FLOPZILLA videos I've made to date. You do not need to watch these in order, although it is very helpful if you've already seen the theory series that address these certain sort of FLOPZILLA problems. So go ahead and make sure you're watching the right type of FLOPZILLA video, which will talk about what you're looking for. So now we're going to do a quick review of theory for 3-bet pots. In 3-bet pots, people will usually be betting around 50 to 55% of the pot on the flop. The reason for this is with 100 big blind stacks, the pot's usually already so big in a 3-bet pot that someone can bet 50% of the pot on all 3 streets in a heads-up 3-bet pot, and they'll usually get very close to all the money in by the river, if not exactly all the money in, by betting 50%. And if 50% won't do it, usually betting around 55 or 60% of the pot on all 3 streets will get all the money in. In normal raise pots, even if a player bets 75% of the pot on all 3 streets, they won't usually get all the money in. If someone does bet 50% of the pot, we must defend with at least 66.7% of our range to prevent our opponent who bet from making an immediate profit. So since our opponent is going to be betting much smaller in a 3-bet pot, that requires us to defend a wider frequency of our range on the flop when we're facing that bet. Otherwise, he can just profitably bet any 2 cards. We should thus most likely be calling at least 70% of the time to prevent our opponent from being able to profitably bet any 2 cards. The reason why I just listed 70% there rather than 66.7% is to prevent our opponent from being able to free roll when he does bet. He should be losing money a lot of the time if he's betting with hands that are very, very weak in 3-bet pots that shouldn't be randomized as bluffs. Letting our opponent make an immediate profit by betting any 2 cards does not necessarily mean we are being exploited. This is something very important which I can only talk about briefly, even though it's a really interesting concept. Rather than do a poor job of explaining why here, simply know that our opponent can still lose money overall on the hand if he makes a slightly plus EV flop bet with any 2 cards, since he has already put so much money into the pot. Okay, so really quickly, if I'm opening in the cutoff in a 6-max game and the button can 3-bet me and make a profit pre-flop by 3-betting any 2 cards, that's very, very clearly a problem. He's just going to never fold, and he's going to just 3-bet recklessly, because when I open the cutoff, if I fold way, way too much, he can 3-bet any 2 cards, and I'll fold so much that he makes an immediate profit. That's very clearly wrong. We can already see how that doesn't make a lot of sense, because the button will just never fold if that's the case. Here in a 3-bet pot, if I open on the cutoff and you 3-bet me in the big blind, once I call, even if you can make a slightly plus EV bet with any 2 cards in your range on the flop, that doesn't mean you're overall making money for the hand. So the easiest way to see this would be to just take the extreme. If I open the cutoff and you 3-bet me in the big blind and I call with 100% of my range, then I'm not really being exploited if you can make a plus 1 EV big blind bet on the flop, because you've already put so much money in, right? So even if the opponent can 3-bet with 7-2 off and profitably bet it on the flop, that's still not going to win him money because he's already invested, 10 or 11 big blinds to get in that spot, and then that C-bet with 7-2 off only makes 1 big blind. So he's overall losing money on the hand, even if in that one spot on the flop that is a profitable bet in a vacuum. So just know, just because an opponent can make a profit by betting any 2 cards does not necessarily mean we're being exploited. A lot of the times it will mean that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. And this is one of those spots where we can't really prove we're being exploited if we are folding enough on the flop that he can profitably bet any 2 cards. Quick review of theory for 3-bet pots continued. We will not need to put in a raise on any street to get all the money in with a strong hand. We can simply let the opponent keep betting or bet when he checks to us, and we'll still get all the money in by the river in a 3-bet pot. When we raise in a 3-bet pot, we will usually not want to choose a sizing that allows us to bet all 3 streets. Instead, we will jam the turn. Alright, so in a 3-bet pot, when you raise the flop, the pot's usually going to be so big on the turn that you're not usually going to be able to bet fold it. That's especially true because the type of boards you're usually going to want to raise with on the flop are going to be boards where even a strong hand you have feels very, very vulnerable. So for example, I'm not going to go into super detail here or anything, but if you open on the button and your opponent 3-bets you in the big blind and you flat, maybe you want to raise a hand like ace queen or ace jack when the board comes, queen 10-4 with a flush draw and you have ace queen. That would be a reasonable spot to raise because ace queen's still a very, very strong hand there, yet the hand still feels vulnerable and there's a lot of turn cards it doesn't want to see. So if you are raising the flop in a 3-bet pot, it's probably going to be on the type of board where you're going to jam the turn. At the flop we're at 9-9-2 rainbow. Those are board textures where you wouldn't need to jam the turn even if the pot was very big, but because of that, you probably would have never raised the flop to begin with on a 9-9-2 rainbow board. So just keep that in mind that raising in 3-bet pots is more rare, largely because of this reason. The opponent has the polarized range since he is the 3-better and will 3-bet a range of value raises and bluff raises. So this is really simple, but it's always really important to think about who has the polarized range. It's something that I think will make you make a lot less mistakes if you just always keep that in your mind. Who has the polarized range now? Am I the one with the range that mostly has bluff catchers? Is he the one that's mixing in value bets and bluffs? Whose range is polarized? Well, when someone 3-bets you and you flat pre-flop, he has the very polarized range, and you have a very, you have a range that consists of a lot of strong but not amazing hands. And then once the flop comes, hand strength is very much redistributed based on how well each hand and each player's range connected on the flop. These factors make us want to raise less than we would for raise pots. We will not have a raising range on most flops, and when we do raise, it will only be with strong yet vulnerable hands which do not want to let the opponent see another card with his entire range. So, the ace-queen example on a queen 10-5 board with a flush draw, that could work in a lot of spots where if you're in the button and you flat with ace-queen and you get that board texture, that hand still is very strong yet vulnerable. That's a reasonable hand to raise, whereas most of the time you're probably going to want to flat. And it will depend on the board texture for how much each player's range had their hand strength redistributed. So for example, on a 9-2-2 rainbow board, that's the board texture where the 3-better is still going to have all the really, really strong hands because he's the one 3-betting all the really big overpairs. If the board was something like ace 9-7 with a flush draw, then that's a board texture where both players will have a lot of very strong hands because both players can probably have ace king and maybe ace queen. So it really depends on the flop, but just keep in mind that how polarized the 3-better's range is with respect to the cold calling range will depend on the board texture. If the board texture is very, very low, then the 3-better is usually going to have the much more polarized range because he'll have a much higher frequency of overpairs. Alright, so for this specific video, assume we opened in the cutoff and the big blind 3-bet. This is the defending range I use against very good players. Jacks to 8s, all that suited stuff. I'll let you go ahead and read it. Just note that it includes all ace-king. So note I am calling with all combos of ace-king, yet 3-betting queen-queen. This is very debatable and based on whether the opponent 3-bets jacks or ace-queen versus a cutoff open. I believe most people 3-bet jacks and flat ace-queen and will mix in 5-bet bluffs with pocket pairs making ace-king suited a less than amazing 4-bet. If you think otherwise, then simply change this range. I of course think it's profitable to 4-bet ace-king in this spot, I just don't think it's as profitable as calling, and I still think queens are very, very close. Lastly, since I am flatting with a relatively wide range in position here, I don't think it's as effective for my opponent to 3-bet 5-bet a hand like ace-x suited. When he does 3-bet and I 4-bet and he gets to 5-bet, ace-x suited might work really well as a bluff randomizer since it does pretty well against, overpairs. Ace-x suited is a pretty good hand to, if you have to get it in with a bluff against a range of overpairs, you'd obviously much rather have ace-5 suited than pocket 3s. The problem is, I'm not usually going to 4-bet him all that often when I'm in position and he 3-bets, and a hand like ace-4 suited is going to be very difficult to play against this flatting range. So because of that, I think my opponents are going to be a little bit more likely to 3-bet pocket pairs, a little bit more likely to 5-bet those. So once again, that's just why I personally prefer flatting with ace-king, although I would surely adjust that if I thought my opponents were doing something differently. This isn't like a fixed range I always use, but if I had to always use one range, it would probably be this. You can also debate hands like king 10 suited versus 9-8 suited versus pocket 7s. You cannot solve this, so pick what you think works best for the range. Watch my pre-flop theory series if you want to know where the range came from in more detail. So once again, a hand like 9-8 suited, that's probably the weakest hand I'm flatting with here, but you're not going to be able to prove mathematically whether or not ace-jack off is better than king-queen off, better than 9-8 suited, or king 10 suited, or pocket 7s. All those hands are probably reasonably close in strength, so you have to pick the ones that you think work best overall for the range, and here I like 9-8 suited best. I chose the cutoff 3-bet flatting range because I wanted to pick a range that's in between the strength of the other ranges. So if we use the button 3-bet flatting range, it would be really, really wide. If we use the under the gun 3-bet flatting range, it would be really, really strong. So I picked this cutoff range because it's in between the two, and it's wide, but it's not crazy wide. So we're definitely going to be struggling in some spots trying to figure out exactly what to do. I'm not quite as comfortable using this range as I am with maybe using, some other flatting in position ranges, but that's okay. We'll generate some random flops and we'll see what we can do. We already have enough theory that it's going to make it pretty clear for what we should do on a lot of board textures, and as we are confused, we'll be able to learn and improve. Alright, so here's our 3-bet flatting range in the cutoff. I've got my calculator ready to go, and I have a Word document that will let me write down the flop and all the combos that we need to defend as we work on random flops. So here we go. Alright, so ace 9-3 with a flush draw. So that's going to be a pretty interesting one. Alright, so the first thing that jumps out to me is this is a board texture where both players' ranges get polarized quite a bit. So, he's maybe 3-betting something like 7.5 or 8% of the time in the big blind, and he has all of his ace-king, and here we are flatting with it around 8.5% of our range, and we have all of our combos of ace-king. So this is definitely a range where it hits both of our ranges really well, and I don't think his range is really that much stronger than ours here. So now this is also a flop where you could really argue whether or not you want to raise all of your ace-king. You can raise some of them, and my guess is, and you see this happen a lot more in 3-bet pots, where you're probably going to want to split the combos. So here, for example, if we raise all of our ace-king, well, all of our ace-king, since we only have 94 combos, I'm going to write that down right here, 94 combos here, and we want to defend 94 times, let's say, 0.7 if he bets a half pot bet. We want to defend 66. If we raise all 12 of our ace-king combos, that's really raising a lot. So we might want to flat with some of our ace-king and raise some of them. That seems pretty reasonable. So there is absolutely no way we're going to be able to prove whether or not raising ace-king is better or flatting with ace-king is better. As I said, I think you could pretty easily see how it makes sense to raise with some ace-king and it makes sense to flat with some of them. We can see how if we're raising them all, that's raising probably way too much. But it's not something you can really prove, so that's very confusing to a lot of people, and you kind of just have to make your best guess. So here I would say maybe we'll want to value raise something like 4, and then maybe we'll want to call with the other 8. To me, that seems about right, because if we value raise 4, we can bluff raise around 6 hand combos. I'm not going to show the math for this, but if you do raise the flop in a normal raise pot, you're allowed to bluff more than this. But in a 3-bet pot, since there's already so much money in the pot and there's little less money behind, you're probably only going to be allowed to bluff, maybe 1.5 combos, or maybe even less than that, maybe only 5 hand combos here, depending on how strong our bluffs are. You'd of course have to work out the math for this one specific spot to see, but 5 seems reasonable. Okay, so if we're raising 9 hand combos, and I'm going to just put down ace-king here, then we're going to want to be calling with 66 minus 9, 57 hand combos. Alright, so now the fun begins. We need to call with 57 hand combos, so let's go ahead and do that. So let's start with top pair. We have top pair or better with, if we're raising the 4, 38 combos. So here I'm going to just go ahead and list them all. Why not? It'll make it easier to see our range. Ace-queen is going to be 8. Sorry, ace-king is going to be 8 remaining. Ace-queen is going to be 12. Go ahead and even put a little 4 by this. Ace-jack is going to be another 12. And then ace-10 suited is going to be another 3. And then lastly, we have pocket 9s. Now, pocket 9s I would prefer to flat here because pocket 9s are just going to be outdrawn on the turn much less than ace-king. So I would rather get a value raise in with ace-king now. The pot's already so big that if the turn does come a heart, even though we're not going to be thrilled about it, if we did raise the flop with ace-king and the turn came like a 6 of hearts, we're going to keep betting, we're going to jam the turn, and we're going to get the money in because ace-king still a strong enough hand there when we have such little money behind. Alright, so now we can add in what I think are the next strongest hands, which are probably going to be something like, pocket jacks, pocket 10s, and flush draws. So let's see, we've got 4 flush draws. Now, I'm not going to raise any flush draws on the flop here, and the reason for that is, as I already said, I don't feel too bad about getting it in with ace-king when the turn comes to 4 of hearts. I'm not worried about our range being, capped relatively low there. Ace-king still a strong enough hand where, if we only have a pot-sized bet left on the turn, it's really not that big of a deal if our range is capped at top pair, top kicker. If he has it beat, he simply has it beat. I'm over it. There's not enough money where it's a big enough problem. If we had, 500 big blind stacks, then obviously being capped with a hand like top pair, top kicker on the turn is going to be a huge problem when the turn brings the flush. But since there's only a pot size bet left, it's not a big deal. I don't think it's okay to not raise any of the flush draws. Since they do have an equity that works much better as a call, I'd prefer to just call them all. Alright, and lastly, we're going to at least flat with our 9x, I assume, and then we'll count them up and see how many we have. So 9x is going to give us middle pair, another 6 combos. So 10-9 suited, 9-8 suited, that gives us 6. So let's count them up. 8, 12, 32, 35, 38, 50, 54, 60. So we actually got 60 here, which is really awesome. It's letting us defend a little bit more than we even wanted to. And on top of that, we're only off by 3, so it's not a very big deal. We can just leave them all there. So let me count once more, just to make sure we're right. 24, 32, 35, 38, 50, 54, 60. Okay, 60. So, since we do have 60 hands, we can maybe even bluff raise with like a 9-8 suited if we don't want to defend this many combos. There's nothing wrong with calling with a few extra, but if we want to, we can move that on to a bluff raise. The other hands are going to work really well as a bluff raise here, other than a hand like 9x, is going to be something like, King of Hearts, Queen X, that's 3 combos right there, and then for the last 3, it can, just be like King, Queen of Spades, King, Jack of Spades. That will get us 5. Honestly, and I could be wrong about this, I think this is about the easiest flop we're ever going to get to defend. Ace-high boards are just a lot easier since we're fighting with Ace-King off and Ace-Queen off and Ace-Jack off. So we got kind of lucky to get this flop as our first flop. We got a really clear example, I think, where it's very easy to defend and not that difficult. We're going to get some other board textures, I'm sure, later on, which are much, much harder to defend. So let's just overlook this range once more. We don't have a whole lot of hands that are working as floats here. So since we only have 4 flush draws, we're probably going to have to turn hands like 10-9 suited and 9-8 suited into bluffs on later streets to balance out our value bets with Ace-King and Ace-Queen. That seems totally fine and not a big issue. There's not really a lot of other draws we can use to flat with. Like, we could float with King X of Hearts instead of raise it if we wanted to. But for the most part, we just don't really have a lot of options here. I would prefer to still flat with a hand like pocket 10s than I would with a hand like 10 Jack of spades. Even though 10 Jack of Spades might play a little bit better on some turn cards, it can jam, a Queen or an 8 or a Spade much more easily than a hand like pocket 10s or pocket Jacks can, which won't bluff or float well at all on the turn. I still think I'd prefer flatting with the Jacks and 10s and just turning the flush draws and the 9x hands into bluffs on the turn or the river as needed. So yeah, I think I like this range a lot, and I'm pretty much ready to go ahead and move on to the next one relatively quickly. So the total combos we defended was 69, which is more than our desired range of 66, but once again, defending 2 or 3% more when we already estimated how much we need to defend, that seems totally reasonable here. So I would just defend this wide if I thought I could defend this many combos and feel pretty good about it. Alright, so let's randomly generate another flop. Alright, so I'm going to clear the calculator and randomly generate another one. Alright, so this one's going to be much, much harder to deal with. 8 of diamonds, 6 of spades, 5 of hearts. Very, very hard flop to defend. Okay, so we unfortunately pretty much completely whiffed this flop. We do not have many suited connectors, whereas our opponent will probably be 3-betting a decent amount of suited connectors and pocket pairs that hit here, and our overpairs suck here compared to our opponents. So this is almost certainly, I would think, a flop where we're not going to be able to defend, our desired 70%, because this flop just misses our range and it hits his range so much better. Once again, he has the better overpairs than us, and he has the better semi-bluffs. So let's go ahead and do the best we can, though. So we have no made hand 108 times. 108 times 0.7. So we're going to be defending, our goal is going to be to defend 76 combos here. I highly doubt we'll accomplish it. And then what was it again? 108 combos is total. I would be quite surprised if this isn't the hardest flop to defend using FLOPZILLA that I've had to do yet. Alright, so let's just start off with the hands that are very clearly going to call, I think. I don't even want to start out with value raising here, because the hands that seem like reasonable value raises to me are only going to be pocket 8s, and even then that seems kind of difficult to really analyze, so we'll come back to that in a minute. So, what do we want to call with for sure? Well, let's call with jacks, 10s, 9s. That gives us 18 combos. We're also going to call with, I think, Ace-King. I think Ace-King's pretty much going to have to be a call. It's the, nut no pair hand. We can call with Ace-Queen suited. We might have to call with Ace-Queen off too, but let's just start with Ace-Queen suited, and let's start with maybe Ace-Jack suited, and king queen suited. Even then, we might have to take those off later, but I think they seem reasonable. And then, of course, the stronger hands than this are going to be 9-8 suited and maybe arguably 10-9 suited, but we'll leave that one out for now. So how many hands is this? That's 18, 21, 37, 40, 43, 46. So far we have 46 hand combos, and even if we do value raise 8s, which I think I'm going to advise not doing, and I'm going to explain why in just a moment, you can already see we're really struggling to defend enough hand combos here. Alright, so why am I going to call with 8s? And so I'm going to add those in right now. Okay, so the reason why I do want to call with 8s, hopefully you thought to yourself, is, well, if this board misses our range so badly, and it's going to be so hard to withstand double barrels on a lot of turn cards, it makes sense to slow play a really, really strong hand here. In addition, even though a 7 would really suck on the turn, other than a 7, you know, like, I'm going to feel okay if the turn comes a 9 or a 4. I'm, of course, not going to enjoy it, but it's a 3-bet pot. We have top set. We're probably not going to get away on a 9 or a 4 turn or river. The 7 would be really bad, but I think it's not as dangerous to slow play 8s here since there's so little money behind, you know, relative to a raise pot, that I think we can get away with flatting top set. Now, one thing that I am noticing about this range, which I do like quite a lot, is it actually looks like it's going to play decently well on the turn. If the turn comes an ace or a king, which are going to be the cards that our opponent's going to think, hey, that hits me, I can double barrel it really aggressively, well, we're going to have a lot of ace kings on the turn. If our opponent does give up on the turn, we can check back the ace kings and turn these 9 combos right here into bluffs as we balance that out with some value bets. So this hand, I think actually, this range, I think actually will play decently well on the turn. The problem, of course, still remains, it's just a very narrow range. We're not defending all that many combos. So now I'm going to add in the 3 combos that I just put in that I was flatting with the 3 top sets, so that brings us up to 49. And now I'm going to look at the board texture a little bit more and sort of think out loud, because we are defending 27 less combos than I wanted to, but I'm not sure we should widen out this range. So let's look at it a little bit more. So the next strongest hands we could flat with, I think, would be something like 10-9 suited and ace-queen off. You know, you could argue king-jack suited with a backdoor flush draw is better than ace-queen off, but for the most part, I think ace-queen off would be the next strongest hand with 10-9 suited. So if we added those hands into our defending range, that would give us 13 more ace-queen off hands and 4 more 10-9 suited hands. So that would be 17 more combos we defend and get us up to 66. So we're still, you know, decently under our desired defending combos. The problem with calling with all those hands then, of course, is this range is already relatively weak. And if we add in more weak hands, yes, we're defending more, but now we're getting to the turn with a much weaker range, whereas this range, as I said, looked, you know, about as good as we could hope for on the turn. It would still connect well on most different turn cards, which was very, very nice. So it's very hard to tell exactly what to do here, but I'm thinking I would rather just fold too much on this flop. Once again, folding too much here on this flop doesn't necessarily mean we're being exploited. We may very well have just gotten very unlucky to get this flop, even if we're using a really, really good range pre-flop. You know, an 8 or a 7 high board is bad for this range, but those boards are pretty uncommon. You know, there's going to be a lot more ace high flops than there are 7 or 8 high flops. So it might not be that big of a deal if we do just have to fold too much on an 8-6-5 board. The other reason why this flop is just completely awful is because not only do we have no flush draws to defend, but this board gives our opponent a lot of really good semi-bluffs. You know, he can maybe have a hand like 7-6 suited. He can maybe have a hand like 8-7 suited, which will work really well as a semi-bluff. He might have some weird 2 pairs like 5-6 suited or 8-6 suited. We don't have any of that. If the board was 8 high, but it looks something like this is a much easier board for us to defend, because now our opponent doesn't have all these awesome semi-bluffs, and we're in position and we can more easily flat with hands like ace-queen off. In addition, we can slow play our top set a lot more easily on this board than we can on this board. So I think this actually is literally about as bad of a flop as we could have possibly gotten on the flop. It's very, very hard to imagine a worse flop. This might literally be it. So we kind of just coincidentally got a really, really easy flop to defend and now an incredibly difficult one to defend. And because of that, I think we're only going to be able to defend about 49 out of our desired 76 combos. So feel free to leave comments on the forums if you guys want about this hand. I do think it's a relatively interesting spot with some neat stuff to talk about. And just sort of keep in mind as we move on, we just really have coincidentally gotten a very, very easy flop to defend and a incredibly difficult flop to defend. It's not usually going to be this hard. It maybe will usually be a little bit difficult to defend, the 60 or 70 combos we want, but it's not usually going to be just so incredibly easy to defend enough combos or so incredibly difficult, as we'll hopefully see in the next few examples. Alright, so let's keep randomly generating them, and boom! Ace 9-3, isn't this almost exactly like what we just did? It is exactly what we just did. FLOPZILLA. Oh no, it's Ace 9-5. Close enough, though, that I'm going to break my rule and randomly generate another one. Boom. Ace Queen 9. That will be quite a lot different. Ace of Hearts, Queen of Diamonds, Nine of Diamonds. Total combos is going to be 86. So you can already see we've reduced a lot of the hand combos we can have because we've connected so much. We've made so many pairs. So 86 times 0.7, that is 60 combos. And we are going to, no, I'm sorry, that was our desired combos defended. Our total combos was 86. Alright, so once again, we can start off with putting whatever hands we want to value raise down. So here, this is a board texture where it might actually make a lot of sense to value raise once again some of our ace queens, but not all of them. If we only want to defend 60 hand combos, if we value raise all of our ace queen, that gives us to 9 hand combos right there. It wouldn't be a terrible thing to do here, since we already have so many hands here which are pretty good, but I think for the most part we don't need to raise them all. So let's say we want to value raise 5 of the ace queens or 4 of the ace queens like we did last time. So we can just put that down there, and we can change that later on as we need to. And we want to maybe bluff raise something like 5 combos to balance that out. And then we're going to want to call the rest, which is around 51 combos, and then we can adjust this as we need to once again. So for calling, let's just go ahead and start with, okay, so we have ace king. We have a lot of top pair hands. Sorry. Oh, a really lot. Okay, so I'm going to write these all down. So we have ace king. I am going to flat with pocket nines. You could raise that. That wouldn't be bad at all. It's very, very close. And to be honest, I would pretty much always make the decision for whether or not I raise ace queen or flat ace queen or raise pocket nines or flat pocket nines based off my opponent. I really wouldn't worry too much about balancing against almost anyone. You can almost always make a better decision than just randomly balancing. If you know it's both okay to raise or flat ace queen or nines here, then see what works against the one specific opponent you're playing against right now. But anyways, I'm going to call them right here. So we got 3 nines, we've got 12 ace king, we've got 5 ace queen remaining, and then we have 12 more ace jack 12, and that's not even counting all of our draws, which I would probably prefer to flat with almost all of our draws and then jam them over our opponent's turn bet. Raising them on the flop is also fine. You're really going to make that decision based on how your opponent plays, because it does suck to flat with a hand like Jack 10 of diamonds and then have to bet call it on a 6 of clubs turn. But that's a risk I'm often willing to take, because it's also really awesome when your opponent double barrel bluffs and then you pick off another bet from your opponent and you jam the Jack 10 of diamonds on the turn. So once again, very close, but personally, I prefer to flat them against, I think, most people. So how many of those are not already counted? Only 2, actually. So that's not very many hand combos. So King Jack of diamonds, which is 1, and Jack 10 of diamonds, which is 1. So we don't have very many flush draws at all here that haven't already made a pair, and I would certainly flat with the flush draws that have made a pair. So let's count that. That's 15, 20, 32, 35, 36, 37. So I'm going to put that in brackets right there so we remember. So now we're also going to have quite a few queens that we can defend with. So king, queen, that's 12. Queen, jack suited, that's 3. And that alone gets us to 37 plus 15 equals 52 hand combos. So we have one more hand combo than we wanted to defend with. On top of that, I kind of wanted to call Jack 10 suited. That hand to me just works better as a call than a bluff raise, because I think people are often going to 3-bet this flop out of position. In theory, if your opponent bets ace queen and you raise him, then maybe he should flat with a hand like ace queen and let you keep bluffing. But I think especially in practice, people are usually going to 3-bet that hand. And in theory, that's a very interesting discussion I don't want to get into. But in practice, at least, people are going to 3-bet a lot on this board, so you're going to want to be pretty careful about raise folding a hand like Jack 10 suited. So, as I said, I think this is very interesting, because you could make an argument that, well, maybe we should actually bluff raise Queen Jack suited, because to be honest, how often are we really going to show down Queen Jack suited? And if you look over here, we're calling with pretty much all made hands. We've really only got 2 draws, so what are we going to bluff with to balance out our value bets with on the turn? Not really much of anything unless you want to turn these hands into bluffs. So, yeah, it's a really interesting spot, and because of that, I think I would actually move Queen Jack suited to the bluff raise, and I would flat with Jack 10 because that works as a better flat and a better bluff based on the fact that we already have so many made hands that we're not going to check this back to showdown. So because of that, I'm going to do a little bit of moving, and I'm going to move Queen Jack suited over there, and I'm going to flat with Jack 10 suited here. I think that's not a very intuitive thing to do, so once again, that's something you'll realize, and it's probably not hugely important in 3-bet pots, but it will be very important in raise pots, that you really want to make sure your calling range is balanced and not only including made hands, because if it does only include made hands, it's very hard to bluff. Likewise, if it is a spot like this where you're thinking, hey, maybe my opponent's flatting range consists only of made hands, then you can use that as a weapon to exploit your opponent. You can know that when you check the turn and your opponent bets, if you're the 3-better here and you bet the flop and your opponent only called with pretty much made hands on the flop, then when he does bet the turn, he's probably not bluffing because people are just simply going to check back King, Queen, or Queen, Jack too much, even if it needs to be turned into a bluff, because they're very, very used to being able to check back marginal strength hands and winning at showdown. They don't see the point in bluffing because they're not aware of what their range looks like. Alright, and lastly, for finishing out our bluff raises, let's go ahead and just add King Jack of Hearts, and then do we want another King Jack? Let's see what other gut shots we have. Yeah, pretty much that seems fine. So King Jack of Hearts, and then King Jack XX, or we'll just say, spades, why not? So that gives us 2 more, and that gives us to 5. So let's overlook this range one more time. Alright, so we have a lot of made hands here, and then some very clear bluffs on the turn with these 5 draws, and then this King Queen, which can sort of be used as a bluff if we need to on the turn. Maybe we want to check back some and bluff some. Once again, when we're in 3-bet pots where we're only needing to defend 60 combos, Ace Queen makes up a huge chunk of our range. King Queen, Ace King make up a huge chunks of our range, where it makes sense to do different things with the same hand as needed. So maybe Queen King will be bluffed sometimes on the turn, checked back sometimes on the turn. It's really going to depend on the turn card and how many hands you're value betting that you need to balance. Same as before, when we value raised Ace King in a 3-bet pot for, I believe, our first example, and we didn't love it, but we felt okay, or at least I felt okay with jamming the turn when the turn came a heart and we had Ace King. We also had some nice bluffs to randomize that with on the turn. I think you can sort of do the same thing here. So even if the turn comes like a 5 of diamonds, I'm probably not loving the turn, but I think I could keep betting Ace Queen. To be honest, I'm not positive if that's true in theory. It'd be a really interesting thing to look into, but my guess is you could bet Ace Queen still on the turn if the turn came a 5 of diamonds. So because of that, I feel okay with raising my Ace Queen here and not balancing that out with any flush draws, especially when it wouldn't matter too much. We have hardly any flush draws to go around. So yeah, overall, I think the value raising and bluff raising range look pretty awesome. Not a big deal for capped at 2 pair on the turn, even if the turn brings a flush, since we already have so much money in the pot. And then, yeah, the calling range will, of course, be very, very balanced on the turn. We have a couple flush draws. We have a lot of really strong hands that can still improve. And then we have some hands like King, Queen off or Jack 10 suited that either can improve on the turn or they can fold to our opponent's double barrel. So, yeah, I like these ranges a lot. And I think we defended, 61 hand combos when we wanted to defend 60. So that looks pretty good to me. Alright, so it's time to randomly generate another one. We're going at a pretty good pace. And then we get another flop that's not like the other one. So we have Jack of Diamonds, 6 of Hearts, 3 diamonds. So the first thing that jumped out to me about this flop is we're pretty lucky that it's Jack high. There's a big difference between a 10 high flop and a Jack high flop, as you can probably see in our range. With a 10 high flop, we don't hit Ace 10 off, but since it is Jack high, that gives us another 9 top pair, top kicker combos. So that's really nice. So we did connect decently well on this flop. So hopefully we'll be able to defend enough hand combos. Let's check. Total is going to be 102 times 0.7. That's going to get us to around 71 or 72. We'll just go ahead and say 72. We'll try to just really defend as much as we can. Started combos defended 72. Total hand combos was 102. Alright, now one of the things you might be wondering right here is whether or not we should raise Ace-Jack for value. And I think it is an interesting enough question that I'm actually going to make a 3-betting range from the big blind through the magic of editing. I'm going to plug that in right now and show you guys what that looks like. And then we're going to be able to more accurately estimate whether or not we should be raising Ace-Jack for value, some of the combos, or if we should be flatting with them all. So I'm going to add that range in now. All right, so here's the big blind 3-betting versus cutoff range that I made in just a minute or two. And it has a very balanced range. Here's our value raising component, which is jacks or better, ace queen suited, and ace king. And then here's all of our bluffs. Now, we could widen this range a little bit based on how much we're going to be 5-bet bluffing. I don't consider ace queen suited a 5-bet bluff, even though we would 5-bet it if we get 4-bet. But the more we 5-bet bluff ace 5 suited, pocket 5s, or pocket 4s, then we could add in a few more bluffs to this range. But for the most part, I think this is very close. It's a pretty accurate 3-betting range from the big blind against a cutoff open, and it's very balanced. So this is just what I chose. If you want to flat with king 10 suited or jack 9 suited or pocket 5s, that's fine. Just mix in 3-bet bluffing with some other hand that's you think is quite strong, but not quite strong enough to call. Now, you can already see here that this range has an overpair or better around, or not around, 23.5% of the time. That's not counting another 12% of flush draws. So this range has either an overpair beat or a flush draw around 35% of the time. So you can kind of already see that's such a huge component that you're not really going to be able to effectively raise ace-jack against this. If you wanted to, you could write out all the combos, write out all the math for, if you raise to this many big blinds, how much does he need to call, how often does he need to call your turn jam, and you could check, and, you could imagine an opponent that continuation bets the flop 100% of the time, in which case maybe you could raise for value. It might not be better than calling, but it still would be a very profitable raise for value. But for the most part, against most reasonable opponents, I think you'd see, if you did work out all the math, that ace-jack is not going to be a strong enough hand to raise for value. You're better off calling against this range because you're not really going to be getting value from anything else that ace-jack beats. Maybe jack 9 suited stacks off, but other than that hand, there's just not a lot he's going to felt with that doesn't at least have a very reasonable chance of outdrawing on your ace-jack. Like, yes, ace-jack is ahead, of course, against a flush draw, but the flush draw is going to draw out so much that it's really not a good thing to raise it. As the 3-betting range gets wider, like it would against a button open when the blinds are going to 3-bet very, very aggressively, and they're going to 3-bet hands like ace-queen off for value, then maybe raising ace-jack gets closer. But here, when we open the cutoff and we did get 3-bet, we're probably not going to be able to raise ace-jack. We're going to be better off just calling with it. Alright, so let's go ahead and just one more thing, if you did want to see how the removal effects affect it, they do affect it slightly, but for the most part, he's still going to have around a flush draw or an overpair 35% of the time. Alright, so let's go back to the big blind versus cutoff. That was the 3-bet win. Cutoff versus big blind flat. Okay, so here we are. So, once again, I don't think I would raise anything for value on this flop, since if we're not raising ace-jack, that was the hand that kind of looked close at first. The next hand we could raise would be pocket jacks, and I don't think we need to raise that hand. I think we're better off just slow playing it. We're still going to feel pretty good about getting top set in on any turn card, even if it's a diamond. So, I'm going to value raise nothing. I'm going to bluff raise nothing, and now I'm going to try to call 72 hand combos, which is going to be decently difficult here, but we'll see what we can do. Okay, so first of all, we're going to call with top set. That's 3 hand combos. Let's look at top pair. Top pair gives us another 24 hand combos, 21. Ace jack is 12. King jack suited, that's 3. Queen jack suited, that's 3. Jack 10 suited, that's 3. So I'm going to put this little bracket right here. I want to make sure I didn't miss any. Top pair. 24. Okay, so we have 24 total here. So we got a long ways to go. Alright, so we can also call with 10s, 9s, and 8s. That gives us another 18 combos. So now we're at 42. Okay, and let's see how many flush draws we have. Flush draws, we have another 6 combos, so I'm just going to put flush draw 6, and we're going to have to remember not to double count those later on. So we've already gotten to now 48 combos. That's not bad. We definitely can find some more somewhere. Alright, so we're going to call with ace king with a diamond. Okay, actually I'm going to write this like this. Ace king 7. What this means is we're calling with every ace king that has a backdoor flush draw. So, or a runner flush draw, I should say. So that would be ace king of hearts, that's 1 combo. Then ace king off with the ace of diamonds, that's 3. Then ace king off with the king of diamonds, that's 3 more. So that gives us 7 more combos that are flatting with here. So that's ace king 7. That's what that means when I write it like that. And then we can do a similar thing with ace queen. We can do ace queen. I'm not sure I want to go all 7. So I'm just going to put this down as ace queen right now and think a little bit more. So that gets us to, once again, using the whole bracket idea. 24, 18, 42, 48, 55. So I'm just going to put a little 55 here, and then I'm going to get rid of this 24 and this 18, because they'll probably, or actually, yeah, I'm going to get rid of this because they're just going to confuse me. So we have 55 hand combos so far. All right, so then we're going to probably call with some ace-queen. Let's go to king-queen of hearts. I like that one a little bit more. It's a little bit trickier. All right, so then we're also at least going to do ace of diamonds, queen X, and then we're going to do ace of heart, or queen of hearts. That gets us 5 more. So now we're going to be at 60. 55 plus 5, 60. Okay, and then we still need to look to see if we can defend anymore. So now I really do dislike the idea of my opponent being able to like continuation bet pocket fours on this flop and make a profit. So I'm really going to try to make this happen where we're going to be defending enough combos. So I'm going to go ahead and add in the other ace queen. So I'm just going to go ahead and make this exactly like I did with ace king. So ace queen 7, queen king of hearts. You know what? I'm even going to do it with king queen. I'm going to do queen king 7. Let's see what that gets us at. That gets us at 69 total. Okay. So let's think about this for a moment. Do we think we can profitably float with queen king here with the backdoor flush draw? I think that's reasonably close, because queen king can turn a 10, which gives an open-ended straight draw. I can turn a queen or a king, which gives top pair, and he's also going to double barrel or triple barrel a lot. A lot of the times we will be beat, though, when he's double and triple barreling. And it also can just turn the flush draw. So I think king queen's very close. And it's one of those things where I'll just be completely honest. I don't have an answer to it. But if you are saying something like this, like if you say, I don't think my opponent should be able to profitably bet pocket fours on this flop, then we do need to defend this wide. I'm not seeing any other hands that I think are better than king queen with the backdoor flush draw that we haven't flatted with. So I'm just going to double check this range once more, and then if we don't find anything better to defend with, I'm going to say, oh, just found something. So we have, I'm just going to actually add this in though, ace 10 of hearts. So this is why I'm going to double check in a moment. All right. So let's run through this. Pocket jacks, ace jack, king jack, queen jack suited, jack 10 suited, that's 3, 15, 18, 21, 24, plus another 18. So that gets us to 42, 48, 7, 55. Okay, that's right. 7 plus 7, that's 69, plus 1, 70. Okay, so we defended with pretty much as many combos as we wanted to, so we can't bet air, and this is what the range pretty much ends up looking like. One last thing you could do, if you do find yourself constantly struggling to defend enough on the flop, and you're saying, I can't call with this many combos, but by the same token, it seems ridiculous that my opponent can profitably bet pocket twos on this flop when they're such a terrible hand that shouldn't be making money against me. Well, one thing you can do is start slow playing some big hands pre-flop. Like as I said, whether or not to flat or 3-bet pocket queens is very, very close. That's going to consistently give us 6 combos to defend with. If you ever slow play pocket aces, that's going to consistently give us combos to defend with. On top of that, if we slow play aces, that might be a reasonable... No, I probably wouldn't raise it here, to be honest. But if we do slow play a hand and we're able to raise it on some board textures, that not only lets us defend those hands that we are raising with for value. So if we're raising aces on the flop, that not only allows us to defend that hand, but we get to defend a bunch of bluffs with it. So when you do call with a very, very strong hand, as I said, I'm not a huge advocate of raising the flop and 3-bet pots in general, but when you do call with them and you get a spot to raise with them, you're going to be able to defend a lot of hand combos. And even if you can't raise with them, it still protects your range. Like if we had pocket aces here, for example, it would really help us with protecting all these pretty weak floats. We have, our pretty strong hands here, our marginally strong hands here, our weak marginal hands here. Then we'd also have, our good draws here, ace king sort of in the middle of a bunch of stuff, and then we have sort of our weak hands right here. By flatting with aces, since this range overall isn't amazing, it really would help this range out quite a bit. So in theory, I imagine you should be flatting with aces sometimes in the cutoff against a 3-bet, and you should be 3-betting it sometimes. In practice, rather than randomize, think, oh, I'm going to flat with 2 combos of aces and 4-bet 4 of them, just look at your opponent's stats and ask, is this the type of villain I want to 4-bet or flat against? So personally, I actually think I learned a little bit doing this on this flop, and I think I would have folded king-queen with the backdoor flush draw if I were actually playing. Now I like calling it a lot more. I don't really like the idea of my opponent being able to profitably bet pocket twos here, so I think I'll be able to make it work. So I would probably now, after having done this flop, be a little more likely to call with king-queen on the flop against most players, and also maybe now I already slow played aces once in a while, but now maybe I want to do it just a tiny bit more to give me a little boost when I do now want to start defending wider on the flop with weaker hands. All right, so total combos defended 70. That's very close to our 72, so I think this looks pretty good here. So this was the next flop I randomly generated. I had to delete the recording, but I want to keep going with this flop because I liked it a lot. And the reason why I did like it so much was this to me is a board where I think if I'm the 3-better in the big blind, I don't like continuation betting this flop with a weak hand. So if I'm saying that as the 3-better, I shouldn't be able to continuation bet this flop with a weak hand, I want to make sure that now when I am the cold caller, when I cold called the 3-bet, that I'm defending enough hand combos that my opponent can't profitably bluff any 2 cards. It might just be an exploitative thing where my opponents are calling with too strong of ranges in position in the cutoff when they call a 3-bet. But I think for the most part that, that sounds right to me. This is not a great board to c-bet when you are in the big blind, so we should be able to defend a whole lot of combos here quite easily in the cutoff. So let's make sure that's the case. Total combos, we have 98. 98 times 0.7 is probably just going to be 70, but let's just double check to see how we round. Okay, 69. And then we are going to want to see if we want to value raise here. Now, value raising here is probably going to be interesting, so let's go ahead and look at the big blind range. Clear, big blind bet versus 3-bet versus cutoff. Okay, so he's going to have an overpair or a flush draw around 28% of the time. So this is a board where I would not hate it if someone value raised it. I personally think calling is going to be better, but I would have to work out all the math. And the reason why I do like calling more, as I've already said, I'm just not that afraid of giving free cards. And since my opponent bets so small on the flop when I call, that forces him to follow through a lot, or else I just print money calling the flop with marginal hands. And then if he check folds too much on the turn, I print money by floating him. So I still like calling here, though it looks like it would be a reasonable spot to argue for raising, because a king, a jack, a 10, and a club are all going to be decently bad turn cards. So this would be a spot where I think if someone said, no, I prefer raising here, I think that's a very reasonable point to argue. Likewise, if someone said, you know what, I don't really like having a raising range here, I prefer to call, I think that's reasonable as well. Another way we can kind of help figure this, another way that can kind of help us figure this out is if we find we have a lot of really, really good hands to call with, then maybe we don't have that many hands that work that well as a bluff raise, so we'd rather have a wider calling range. Or the opposite could be true, where if we have a lot of hands that work really well as a bluff raise, but not very well as a call, then maybe we want to start value raising ace-queen so we can have a bluff raising range. All right, so let's go ahead and look. I'm going to start off with not raising anything, but I'm going to be willing to change my mind on that. So let's see what our range would look like if we called everything. All right, come on. So we have 3 combos of sets, so let's put those down first. Then let's check out our top pair. And we have a lot, 30%. That's a huge amount. All right, so top pair is going to be ace-queen, which is 12, king-queen, which is 12, king-jack suited, which is 3, and then what else? Let's see our middle pairs. We also have a bunch of middle pairs. That makes our life easier. Jacks, 10s, so that gives us another 12 hand combos. All right, what else? All right, so flush draws, let's just go to you guys next. That's another 5 combos. And let's count that and see how many we're at. So we're at 3 plus 12 plus 12, that's 27, 30, 42, 47. So we're at 47, and we've got 22 more to go. So let's see what else we want to call with here. So we also are going to have Jack 10 suited. That gives us another 3. Pocket 8s are going to be folded. All right. Let's check out our gut shots. Okay, so King Jack suited, that gives us another 3. We don't want to double count. Even though it says 4 on FLOPZILLA, we obviously already have one of those King Jack suited as a flush draw, so we don't want to double count that, so we're just going to call with that. Okay, so that gets us to 53 combos, so we're going to need to call with 16 more. Okay, 16 more. So what else would I call it? I would call it Ace of Clubs, King X, and then, actually, I'm probably going to do the 7 thing. Ace King, that's 7. That gets us to what? That gets us to 60, so we have 9 more to go. Then Ace Jack suited Ace Jack of hearts, Ace 10 of hearts, and then do we have any other really good hands? We have Ace Clubs, Jack X, so that's another 5 hand combos there. That's 3 for this, 1 for this, 1 for this. Then we still have a few more to go. I don't want to stretch this out too far. A few more to go. Let's see if there's anything else. It looks like it completely missed on us having pairs of 9s. So let's write that down. 10-9 suited. 10-9 suited, 9-8 suited. So that gets us another 6. So I'm just going to count these up once more. So that's 47, 50, 53, 60, 65, plus 6 more. So that's going to get us 71, which is a little bit more than we wanted to defend. So let's go ahead and look at this and make sure we didn't miss anything, because I did miss the 9s for a moment. Okay, so we have all that. I want to make sure we have all. Pretty much we're calling with all of our pairs except for pocket 8s, which of course seems pretty reasonable. Okay, so I think this range right here is fine. I actually like this range a decent amount, but I'm not in love with it. I think the idea of bluff raising some of these, sort of weak hands right here, and then balancing that out with some ace-queen, it does appeal to me, especially when we take into account that ace-king really isn't going to be feeling awesome when it turns top pair here. In most spots where you turn, a top pair, top kicker with a king, it's like, awesome, gotcha. But in this spot, top pair, top kicker on a king, when the turn comes to king of spades, that's not going to be that great against the big blind. I mean, we can look right now. That's not going to be that great against the big blind range. He's still going to have it beat. Well, actually, not as much as I thought. He's going to have it beat 16% of the time. So I guess that is a much better turn than I thought. So that's good to know. That makes sense, I guess, since most players would flat jack 10 suited there. Okay, so live and learn. It actually looks like ace-king is going to work a lot better as a call than I originally thought, because the king's a lot better turn than I thought. Let's look at an ace. An ace is, once again, going to usually be quite good. All right, so once again, I'm learning as I do this as well. I sure don't have every single board texture memorized for all my ranges. So that's something that I just learned while doing FLOPZILLA. Now, I at first thought ace-queen this range was going to be mostly call our entire range. Then I thought maybe we should be raising it because this hand looked like a bad call. Ace-king, ace-jack, and ace-10 of hearts. Now I'm thinking they actually, especially the ace-king, which make up much more of the combos, they actually look like much more reasonable calls than I thought. So, maybe you want to still value raise just a tiny bit of ace-queen so we can bluff raise these hands because, ace-jack of clubs isn't going to play that well as a call. So maybe we want to raise, I'm just going to write this out to show. So maybe we want to raise, 3 combos of ace-queen and balance that out with 5 combos of bluff raises, ace-jack of hearts, ace-10 of hearts, ace-jack of clubs, and jack-x. So that's 5. So that equals 5 total. So this would also be reasonable, I think, to do something like this. And then, once again, which one's better, since it's probably so close that you're just going to look at your opponent's stats and then decide. But which one's better, trying to solve for that using math and all the different possible turn and river cards, is going to be so incredibly time-consuming that it's really just not worth it, in my opinion. We can look at this and say, okay, this looks reasonably close between whether or not we want to raise a few hand combos or whether or not we want to flat with our entire range, and then, do whatever works best for your own playing style, or much more importantly, do whatever works best to beat your specific opponent if you have any sort of read on him. Alright, so we've got just a few more minutes left, so I don't want to do another hand in detail because I don't know if we have time for that and I want to wrap things up. So I'm just going to randomly generate a few flops, and then I'm going to see what jumps out to me to give us something to talk about without actually writing down all the combos. Like, if we were actually playing, we wouldn't be able to write down all the combos and get what we think is the perfect defending range. So let's look. Boom. Jack 7-2. So this looks exactly like the board we just had. So if you had done this on your own, or if you'd seen this video, you would kind of already from memory be able to go, okay, let's scroll up. We have Jack 6-3 with a flush draw. We're going to use pretty much exactly the same range on this board we randomly generated. That's why it's so useful to do stuff like this. You just get so many flops that are similar, and even if you have a flop that you've never seen before, it will likely be, somewhere between maybe 2 flops you have done. So here, I would pretty much just use exactly this, and I would know, hey, this was that board texture where I had to call with king-queen, which I didn't think I would have to, and it made me think maybe I should slow play a few more aces pre-flop, or maybe call with queens instead of 3-bet them, as well as made me think, or reinforced what I already thought, which was ace-jack really isn't strong enough to raise for value here. So let's do another one. King 8-4. So this is unfortunately one we really didn't have time to do. So this is a board texture where it's so dry that I wouldn't want to raise anything, and I think that's pretty standard. There's no reason to raise ace-king. You're going to be able to get all the money in by the river, and if he does happen to drill a gut shot or 2 pair, such is life. There's no reason to raise now. Let him keep bluffing. So this is a board where you're going to have to call relatively wide. You're probably going to be calling with most of your... Let me actually put the right range up. Sorry about that. You're going to probably have to be calling with most of, your decent backdoor flush draws like ace-jack and ace-10 of suited. Those are for sure going to be calls. You might even want to call with a hand like 10-9 of diamonds, which can turn some interesting stuff. For example, if you call with 10-9 of diamonds and the turn comes, a jack or a diamond or both. It could be a jack of diamonds. Then you can either jam it on the turn, or you can flat it again based on how you think your opponent plays and what's going to be effective based on the turn card. So this is a board texture where it's probably going to be a little bit harder to flat a very wide range, but it's not going to be like one of the first board textures we had where the flop was, I think, was something like 8-6-5, where not only were all of our floats very, very vulnerable hands, our opponent had a lot of really, really strong bluffs, whereas we didn't have that. Here, we're on much more equal footing when the board's 8, King 3. You know, he's going to have a lot of really weak air hands that he'd see betting. Likewise, we're going to have a lot of really weak air hands that we're floating with, and we have the advantage of position. So this is a board where it will be a little bit difficult to call enough hand combos, but luckily once, you know, you get kind of comfortable for what you need to call with here, they're not very hard to play on the turn, whereas other board textures are much more difficult to play. Let's do one more, or maybe two more. Ace, King, Queen, Rainbow. Now this one is extremely interesting. I think I would have a raising range here, because I think if I raise a hand like Jack 10, I want to get value from sets in Ace King and Ace Queen now, so I would at least raise Jack 10 here on this flop, and then I'm not really worried about my range being capped out like Ace King if I flat with Ace King and raise with Jack 10. If he happens to have the straight or a set, such as life, especially when I'm blocking so many possible set combos when I have Ace King or Ace Queen. So this is a board texture where I think I would for sure have a raising range. You know, I would have to look at it in really close detail to see if I think that's correct, but my gut reaction is it makes a whole lot of sense to raise with a Jack 10 here. So I would raise with a Jack 10, balance that out with a lot of bluffs, and then I would end up calling, you know, with a relatively wide range of Ace Jack, or sorry, like Ace Jack and better, and maybe even like Ace 10. It might even be a little bit wider than that. But yeah, this is a range where I'd like having this is a flop where I like having a flop raising range, and I think it's going to be a really interesting one. This would be a really interesting one to do on your own, because to be quite honest, off the top of my head, I'm not sure exactly what we should be doing with hands like pocket jacks. Those could very well, like jacks and tens, could easily be the bluff raises on this flop, I think, because it just hits our range so incredibly hard. The hands we're going to be folding are usually going to be like 10-9 suited, pocket 9s, pocket 8s, 9-8 suited. So we might even have to fold a hand like pocket 10s here, bluff pocket jacks, and bluff, you know, maybe like queen jack suited or king jack suited, so this will balance out our jack 10 suited that are raising. We probably wouldn't need to bluff raise all of these, but we could maybe bluff raise with, you know, pocket jacks, at least pocket jacks, and then, you know, flat with all of this stuff up here, king, queen, or queen jack suited and better. So very, very interesting flop, very complicated one that as I said, I don't know this one off the top of my head, but I have done enough flops where you kind of have some idea of what you should do, but you can easily be wrong here, and it's not until you actually write out what you should do with your entire range where I think you're really going to improve and be like, oh, okay, that makes sense, I was doing this wrong. I was flatting with pocket jacks here because I thought it was a pair and a gutter, or I was folding pocket jacks here, but that's actually the worst option because I'm raising Jack 10 suited. I should be bluff raising with that, and I should be folding, you know, these 24 combos. So, was that actually 24? I don't want to. That's 26 combos. So that seems really reasonable to me. So yeah, very interesting flop. So now we are at the end of the video. So first off, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Hopefully 3-bet pots seem a bit less scary for the smaller stake players who may feel uncomfortable playing in them, and the higher stakes players have a better idea of what is close to theoretically optimal in some common spots. I know I used to be really afraid of 3-bet pots, but to be honest, they're really just not that tricky or that scary. Yeah, there's some hands which it's unclear of what line to take against certain opponents, but for the most part, it's not any different than poker at any other spot. There's just more money at stake, and that's just part of playing cards. Sometimes you get in spots where mistakes are going to matter more because the pot's bigger. That doesn't make them any tougher, and hopefully you can see that after watching this video. And feel free to give me feedback and ask questions in the forums. Thanks, guys. Good luck at the tables. Bye.